enjoyed watching last week. So this one was about Africa. It was on Zero Books, and they had this on the Zero Books YouTube channel, and they had a professor slash journalist, Milton Allimadi, and he talked about really Africa and the US's relation and China's relation to it. And he had a very interesting point at the end that I wanted to ask you also, Sam. But the first kind of thing that he talked about was how the US has a relatively decent boot footprint on different African countries, although most of it is not official. And then what's interesting, I mean, this isn't like you can just go on Wikipedia and you find this out, but I didn't know. So pretty much AFRICOM, which is like one of the 11 of US's like main defense centers, and it's responsible for all of Africa. Pretty much the US couldn't get any countries to agree to have that headquarter. According to the way he was telling the story, Milton Allimadi, none of the African countries agreed to have them stationed. That's why they operate from Stuttgart, Germany. So that was interesting. Yeah, apparently they were close to convincing the Liberians, he said, but Nigeria stepped in and whatever, and then it was like, no, for some reason AFRICOM can't be anywhere on
That's
the.
something we should look into.
Yeah.
I that seems very interesting because um, nations in Africa seem ripe for a
Oh
big
yeah, I mean he
drive.
was talking about how Uganda is basically like a puppet of the US right now, and and he was saying the US has troops, and during Obama we all know that they tried to
Sure, the
up their
French have
presence.
got,
Yeah,
yeah.
but he was saying the AFRICOM Center, maybe if you ask the Americans, they'll be like, oh no, we wanted it to be in Stuttgart, it's better. But the way he was kind of telling the story was interesting. Then he talked about China. So the China part was interesting too. So he kind of differentiated between what he called 20th century China and 21st century China. So he said China in the 70s and even 60s was a good friend of Africa in the sense that it would help them by like building infrastructure and all that, but not like asking for, anything in return or, not giving out loans. Just kind of doing that. But he was saying that now, of course, they still build a lot of infrastructure and all that, but, totally different. Their interests are much more obvious now, and, they want things in return. So that was interesting. He really differentiated between 20th century and 21st century, and then it kind of China, and then at the end it came back to this usual question that you hear, which is like, so what's better for Africa, to be partners with China, or I guess, and its kind of development approach where they kind of build stuff and give you loans compared to the US's let's say more military approach to gaining resources from a country. And his main point was that sure, maybe China is maybe okay, fine, maybe better go with China, lesser of the two evils. But he was saying at the end, as long as African nations don't industrialize, meaning as long as resources are taken out of Africa, manufactured somewhere else, and then you buy them again to support your own nation and your own population, you're not going to get anywhere pretty much in life. He said that they're always going to remain impoverished. So yeah, it just made me think of the whole important aspect of like industrializing and at least like manufacturing most of your goods and having all your food and all that grown, at least most of it. So that's what I always thought about Iran. I always thought like Iran, maybe under all these sanctions, has always fared better because they produce a lot of things, a lot of different things, and of course they also have a decent agriculture sector. But yeah, what do you make of that and his whole general point?
Uh,
And also, yeah,
I'm
my take on Iran.
I,
Maybe I'm even wrong there.
the China thing. I think any smart nation would try to play China, Russia, America off of each other to maximize their own benefit. It will be risky, but I would think, of course, naturally, going into a deal with uh, U.S. is a much more powerful nation than China, at least for now, right? So, uh, going into a deal with China may be more beneficial, but he differentiated between 20th century and 21st century China. I guess the difference is China is far more powerful now,
Yeah.
so they demand far more. So I guess it's just that you have to first of all go case by cases, Secondly, yeah, it's just right now China probably offers better deals because it's a weaker party, but that may change in 20 years or
And what do
even
you make about
less
his
so.
whole industrialization? I
No,
mean,
no, I
it's
definitely agree with that.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I to be
it's not
fair,
like
I have
something crazy, but it's just like so true. It
yeah
just
that
gets to the root of the problem. Like if, not the root of the problem, but the root of the consequence, maybe kind of like the effect of how it's been going.
yeah, and I mean that's just I think that's a largely established, not fact, but
Yeah,
like a common thing in economics that yeah, as long as you're just a raw material exporting country, you're not really like because you're importing the same stuff assembled and manufactured and processed at a far higher price. So,
yeah.
it's
Unless
I
maybe
think he's
yeah,
completely true. I think what he's saying is basically uh, true.
yeah. Unless I guess the exception are kind of like the Gulf states, and that's because of oil is kind of different kind of
Not even
resource.
no,
I
no,
feel
no. Even for example, I know that about Iran. At least that was the case until a few years ago, because I think during the last 5, 10 years they added refineries, but they would export oil
hmm
at a price, and then they would buy petrol, a refined version of that same oil from Japan or other countries at a much higher price. So no, even not even necessarily oil-rich countries benefit from that. Oil-rich countries, some of them have the biggest deficits in the
yeah.
world. So
No, that's true. But I guess if you do find exceptions, it'll
in
be there.
Norway,
Yeah, I mean, no,
Sweden,
yeah, Norway is a bit different.
that
But I was
that's
thinking of like UAE
drastic.
or like Qatar. I mean,
But
I
they didn't.
doubt.
No,
Huh?
no, they didn't really. I mean, they became financial hubs. They became like
Yeah,
London, and all industry they have is basically housing.
yeah.
That's all the whole thing. They don't have any. I mean, they do have some nanotechnology, that type of thing, but I doubt they have any major manufacturing,
But how
you
much do you
know.
think? Would you do you even agree with my premise that like Iran is like a relatively, at least for itself, it can
Oh,
manufacture a lot of its own things, and that has helped it to kind of weather the sanctions.
relative to where it should be, like when I said that a lot of lefties go too far because they sometimes I see these lefties talk about Iran and China as if they're these two poor nations, like, oh, Iran and China are under so much pressure they can't develop. Of course they can't develop because of US sanctions. I think in case of China and Iran, I think especially Iran more so than China, it should be far ahead of where it is right now in terms of industrialization, technological development. I mean, a very famous example used among Iranians is the comparison made between car manufacturers in Iran and car manufacturers in South Korea, which both started at the same time. And I believe in the early version, the car manufacturers in Iran were manufacturing better quality cars, right? So I think compared to where it should be, it's like which is somewhere near South Korea or Japan. It's yeah, it's not there.
Yeah.
It's very disappointing. It's very dependent on foreign importation of a lot of manufactured goods. Still, for example, they export a lot of stones, a lot of precious metals, that type of thing. So compare it should be, yeah, it's disappointing, but yeah, I think it's definitely far ahead of some other nations. That's for sure in terms of independent. It's still the most industrialized country in the Middle East, I think. It's just like with Turkey, they're just because Iran has a lot of iron or steel production, that type of thing. So yeah, I do think in terms of agriculture, I think what has happened in Iran, sadly, that it might take that with the ex population growing, in my view, too much, and then expansion of agriculture, and sadly, technology hasn't progressed in the agriculture industry in Iran as much, partially due to sanctions. partially due to incompetence. So, in that field, I feel like we are reaching very dangerous territory with the whole environment and climate change. For like 9% of Iran is arable land, and increasingly they're destroying jungles, forests for agricultural purposes, and yeah, it's a dangerous territory, and I don't think it's more decent than, again, like some other countries, I think, in the region, relative to they try to control food prices and all that. But yeah, I mean, I don't think decent, I think, is way too positive of you know putting it.
Yeah, no, no, fair enough, fair enough. But yeah, so sorry we
It,
jumped from Africa to Iran because I mean agreed with what he was saying with Africa, but our
yeah,
knowledge of different African nations limit
yeah,
that
it's
to
not, yeah.
transport the argument to a different
Yeah, to
region.
very, uh, no,
But
but do you think there is a point to your argument
yeah,
that, I mean, out of necessity or out of goodness of their heart or whatever, governments in Iran had to basically they had to become more independent, and yeah, and that helps them when they come under external pressure.
yeah.
Like,
Okay.
like I must say, Iranian military has developed significantly.
The military
No,
sector seems like everywhere, no matter what,
no,
it
no, you
manages
can't
to.
talk about Saudi Arabia
Yeah,
or Qatar, or the countries that are in a cozy relationship and rely on U.S. support, or
that's true.
European countries.
No,
Yeah,
very true,
so
actually.
I mean that
Yeah.
industry does employ people too. So
No, no, definitely, definitely. I guess when there's a will for the military sector, they always manage to find a way to
yeah,
build
that's
and
true.
stuff. But yeah, very true. In the case of the Europeans or the Saudis and all that, not much for them there, except maybe Trump put some pressure on the
I mean,
Europeans.
they get bets, they get improved technologies, they
Yeah,
get upgraded technologies, but in terms of like actual war experience, they have none.
yeah.
And